We have come to a conclusion based on strict judgment. And the conclusion is, every Jew is indescribably precious. So it's not a lack of judgment, it's not non-judgmental, it is a premeditated conclusion. Every Jew is the apple of God's eye. This very patriotic guy who loved America went to Washington. And he was taking in all the views. He was so proud. He was so impressed.
Sorry.
More technology? But then he noticed, not far from the White House, there was a building that didn't look like an American architecture. And he heard people singing, and they weren't American songs. And they were speaking, and it wasn't English or Spanish, the language of America. And when he saw the people there, they weren't dressed like Americans. So he was very offended, and he knocks on the door. The guy comes to the door, and he says to him, "How long have you been living in the United States?" The guy says, 30 years. He says, 30 years you enjoyed all the benefits of this country, and you don't have the decency to speak English? To dress like an American, to sing American songs, to build American structures? Shame on you. And the guy said, excuse me, but this is the Norwegian embassy. Our job is to show America how we live, how we dress, how we sing. If I dressed like you and sang the songs you sing and spoke the same language you speak, I would lose my job. So of course the guy apologized and understood. Every Jew, wherever we are an embassy. We're an embassy. We are here in this world to show the world how it's done Jewishly. So if we dress different, if we sing different songs, we celebrate different holidays, that's our job. If we stop doing that, we'll lose our job. So, are we justified in maintaining our customs? Of course we are. We are the embassy. The greatness of the Rebbe's achievement was that he raised an entire generation of ordinary, average students. But he raised them with the conviction that they are embassies, that they are not private citizens, and that you don't live for yourself. You take responsibility for your family, for your community, for the world. Because we were born to make the world better. That's our mission, that's our job, that's our purpose. Now, everybody can say that. Everyone can teach that. But to actually imbue young students, boys and girls, with an enthusiasm for this mission, the Rebbe was unique. I remember sitting in yeshiva and seeing how the few shluchim that already existed then, in the early 60s, to see how they inspired others was so exciting that I stopped studying very well because I was impatient. I want to go out there and do something. The Rebbe's vision was really exciting. Now, my family came to America in 1950 from Europe. The mood, the attitude in the religious community was one of hopelessness and despair. Everyone was convinced that that was the last generation of observant Jews. After all, this is America. What worked in Europe can't work here. And they felt that they were the last, a dying breed, and that there wasn't going to be another generation of observant Jews. In fact, my grandfather once said to me, "Will you at least keep Shabbos?" That's how desperate the thinking was. But we happened to live in Crown Heights. And there was one place, one building, one street that was always alive. There was always something going on. Late at night, early in the morning, people were singing, people were enthusiastic. It was irresistible. And I found out that that's 770. That's the Rebbe's center. And from there, the Rebbe took it upon himself to literally change the world. His father-in-law took it upon himself to destroy communism, to fight communism, which is a huge undertaking. Took a lot of sacrifice. Every Chabad family lost a father, a husband, a son in the fight against communism. But in the end, as we all know, Judaism won. Communism is dead, and Judaism is thriving in the former Soviet Union. Unbelievably. But that was a limited battle, a battle against communism. The Rebbe's ambition was to change the world. Step number one in changing the world is to get people to think beyond themselves. No one has the luxury of being a private citizen. We all have an effect. We all create a circle, some larger, some smaller, but no one is really a private citizen. The attitude, live and let live, not by the Rebbe. Live and make sure everybody else lives a meaningful life. All the experts predicted that without the Rebbe, this whole thing will fall apart. People who went out to Siberia, to Vietnam, to Zaire, Africa, to the Congo, they're all going to leave and they're all going to come back to Crown Heights. Because without the Rebbe's inspiration, it wouldn't work. Well, they were wrong. Very, very wrong. Not only did no one leave their positions, but since the Rebbe's passing, the number of shluchim has doubled, more than doubled. Young people who had never really gotten to know the Rebbe. Some have never even seen the Rebbe, and yet they can't wait. to find a place that needs their help and buy a one-way ticket and go there and do what they can for the community. What is the secret? Why is this working? There are a few things. Number one, the Rebbe came up with a premise. All Jews want to be better Jews. Is this true? All Jews want to be better Jews. You couldn't convince anyone 50 years ago. No, on the contrary. Everyone is becoming more secular. People are dropping out. Nobody wants to be more Jewish. We want to be less Jewish. We were having nose jobs. Shortening our noses, shortening our names. That's the direction, that's where things were going. The Rebbe said, no, Jews want to be better Jews. And that desire is their truest, deepest desire. And the Rebbe said, don't take my word for it. Test my theory. Here's a ticket. Go to some community that doesn't really want you. You weren't invited. They don't know why you're coming. Go there. Stay there for 10 years and tell me what happens. Rabbi Herbert Wiener was a Reform rabbi, but he was interested in mysticism. So he wrote a book called 9.5 Mystics. He was the half. And he interviewed 9 mystics for the book. He interviewed the Rebbe. The Rebbe didn't give interviews, but for some reason, he got an interview. And among the things that they spoke about, Rabbi Wiener said to the Rebbe, I was talking to some of your students, waiting for my turn to see you, and I noticed that they have these innocent eyes. They're naive. They're sheltered. Is this good? And the Rebbe said, what you noticed is not naivete. What you noticed is they don't have a split in their eyes, because they're not trying to live in two worlds. They know which world they live in. So there's a wholesomeness, not a naivete. And the proof is, if they were naive, and I send out a young couple to a community where they're the only Shomer Shabbos, they're the only ones keeping kosher. If they were naive, a few years later they would all be assimilated. But that's not what happens. They go, and 10 years later, there's a whole observant community built around them. So they can't possibly be naive. So here's what the Rebbe did. He pointed to an absolute truth. Jews want to be Jews. Jews want to be good Jews. Jews want to be better Jews. But the education has been interrupted. The great yeshivas are no longer, so somebody's got to step in. And so couple after couple after couple got one-way tickets to a community and devoted their lives to that community. The results are magnificent. And the reason is because what the Rebbe claimed turns out to be true. Jews really do want to be better Jews. The head of the Reform rabbinate was speaking about the success of Chabad. And they're trying to figure out, what's the secret? And he said, the reason Chabad is always successful is because at every event at Chabad, they serve food. And of course, when you serve food, people come. Well, first of all, we're not the only ones who serve food. In fact, there are places you can get better food. So that can't be the answer. Then they came up with another theory. The other theory was that Chabad is so successful because Chabad is non-judgmental. That's really funny. If anything, we are the most judgmental. Right? A Chabad rabbi meets a Jew and says, "Do you have a mezuzah on your door?" He says, "Yes." He says, "Every door?" One mezuzah on the front door? Not enough. How about on the garage? Come on. That's non-judgmental? A Chabad rabbi meets a Jew and says, "Do you keep kosher?" He says, "Yes." He says, "Glatt kosher?" It's never good enough. "Do you put on tefillin?" "Yes." "One pair or two pair?" Never enough. We're very judgmental. It just so happens that part of our judgment, having studied Chassidus and Kabbalah and Midrash and all the other parts of Torah, we have come to a conclusion based on strict judgment. And the conclusion is, every Jew is indescribably precious. So it's not a lack of judgment, it's not non-judgmental, it is a premeditated conclusion. Every Jew is the apple of God's eye. You don't mess with that. So why is Chabad successful? Because what the Rebbe claimed is true. It's true. So even after the Rebbe passes away, Jews want to be better Jews. It's still true, so it still works. There's another thing that inspired me as a teenager. The Rebbe believed that young people are idealistic. They don't want to be pampered. They don't want to be spoiled. They don't want an easy life. They want a challenge. They want to feel like they're making a difference. They want to feel like they're doing something, changing the world, no less. So the Rebbe created an army out of young people. This is unprecedented. In traditional communities, the elders get all the respect. The elders have all the opinion, the authority. The Rebbe started something really different, and people didn't relate to it. They couldn't understand it. The Rebbe created an army of 20-somethings. What could 20-somethings do? What do they know? They're babies. They're immature. And you send them out to a community where they are the only ones, and you expect them to make a change and a difference? And the answer was, idealism is more important than experience, training. When you're idealistic, you can do anything. So look what happens. Yeshiva boys, simple kids. I grew up with them. I know them. Nothing extraordinary, nothing special, and no special training. And they go out into a community and they build buildings, $6 million, $7 million. These guys can't add. They never mastered the multiplication table. And I say, how much did it cost you to build this building? Oh, we thought it would be 6 million, it turned out 7 million. Oh, just like that. Where did they learn this? And then when there's a flood, who are the first responders? Chabad. They needed a helicopter. All of a sudden, there are helicopters. FEMA is still figuring out what to do. And these guys, straight out of yeshiva, who don't speak English very well, have arranged for a helicopter. And you ask them, how did you do that? They said, well, you needed a helicopter. You do what you got to do. Nothing stands in their way, because when you're idealistic, that overcomes every obstacle. And the amazing thing is, for 50 years, the Rebbe maintained absolute confidence in our idealism. He never offered a reward. He never offered praise and fame. Only on your idealism. It's an honor system. You go because you believe in what you're doing. And there's not going to be any rewards. There's not going to be any ceremonies. You're going to do what you do for the rest of your life, and nobody will even notice. Well, that's called idealistic. One rabbi who was a shliach wrote to the Rebbe about an activity that he had pulled off, and the Rebbe didn't answer. So he writes to the Rebbe, did I do something wrong? Why didn't the Rebbe answer? And the Rebbe said, more or less in these words, he said, not every time you do something do you need a pat on the back. You did what you had to do, and that's what you had to do. He kept us focused on our own idealism and never gave up on us. In the 1980s, the Rebbe did another unprecedented thing. He allowed the Farbrengen to be televised. Actually, it wasn't television. It wasn't cable either. It was satellite, hook up, down, up and down, I don't know. It was cutting edge technology. There were these huge cameras in the Farbrengen. There was this huge dish on the roof of 770. And the Farbrengens were satellite broadcast. And everywhere in the world, they were picking up the Farbrengen. It was amazing. They had a number at the bottom of the screen for anybody who wanted to call in to find out what they're looking at. We got a phone call from a United States Navy ship out in Greenland. And there were two Jews on the ship. And they were playing with the remote, and all of a sudden there's a Farbrengen. They were fascinated. One radio host in Canada told me that he accidentally came upon the Farbrengen. He says, I just couldn't look away. I couldn't change the channel. I just sat there and cried. I said, why were you crying? The Farbrengen is a happy occasion. There is singing, there's l'chaim. What were you crying? He said, it's the first time in my life I saw a Jew who was completely comfortable in his Jewish skin. I mean, this was broadcast to the world. And the Rebbe Farbrengen exactly the way he would Farbrengen if there were only Chassidim. Completely comfortable in his skin. And I always wondered, by the way, you know, there are so many rabbis who are great speakers in their temples, in their synagogues. They give these fantastic sermons, and they're very proud. And they published them. How come in all the years, none of those rabbis ever went on television? Why don't you share what you have to say with the world? Somehow, in the security of the synagogue, I'm great. But exposed to the world, not that comfortable. And the Rebbe went out to the world as a Rebbe, speaking Yiddish. And I had the privilege of being the translator. So I got to tell you this little incident. For 8 years, 6 times a year, there were satellite hookups for the Fabrengens. I never thought, how did I get the job? How did I end up being the translator? There was no training for it. And I went to the library. I thought, let me do this professionally. If I'm going to do it, let me do it professionally. I go to the library. I take out a book on simultaneous translation. Now, where do people do simultaneous translation? At the UN. So the book was mostly about the UN. And here's the advice that they gave. First of all, look over the notes carefully. Which means every speaker gives his translator his speech in writing in advance. Well, that wasn't going to happen with the Rebbe. So that piece of advice was gone. The second piece of advice was, don't hesitate to use the red light. The speaker had a little red light on his podium, and if he was going a little too fast for the translator would push a button that meant slow down. Well, that wasn't going to happen by a Friedman. There was nothing in the book that was useful, because this is unprecedented. So, I don't know. How did I get the job? So years after the Fabrengen stopped, I happened to be talking to the Rebbe's secretary who was in charge of the hookups. And I said, how is it the Rebbe trusted me to translate his words? Did you tell him that it was good, that he trusted you? He says, the Rebbe never asked me. I said, so it was your son who organized the whole thing? He was the authority? He told the Rebbe it was good? No, not that I know of. I said, so how did this happen? I'm translating the Rebbe's words to the world. Who approved it? He says, you know, the Rebbe lets everybody use their talent, and if you're willing and you're doing it, he's fine with it. So this is way too personal to be that casual. So I found out that after the second Fabrengen, they brought a little player into the Rebbe's room, and they played one talk, one sikha for the Rebbe, with the translation. The Rebbe listened to the whole thing. Someplace during the taping, he smiled at something, didn't say anything, and when the sikha was finished, he said, thank you very much, and they took the machine out, and that was it. So I asked Rabbi Krinsky, I don't understand. If the Rebbe was going to check on my translation, why didn't he do it after the first Fabrengen? Why did he wait after the second? Listen to what Rabbi Krinsky says. He says, you think the Rebbe was checking to see if you were doing a good job? The Rebbe was checking to see what he could do to make your job easier. And then I remembered that at the third Farbrengen, I translated a phrase that the Rebbe used a lot, with more strength and with more power. That's how I translated it. At the third Farbrengen, the Rebbe used his expression, that common expression, and he translated himself. He said, with more strength and more enthusiasm. I got it. So it was true. He was checking to see how to make it easier for me. And that's the Lubavitcher Rebbe. The Rebbe once said about his father-in-law, what is a true leader? A true leader is someone who does not move from one responsibility to another. He adds responsibility to the previous. So, my father-in-law, the Rebbe says, my father-in-law was first responsible for his family before he became Rebbe. Then he became responsible for the yeshiva in Russia. He was the dean of the yeshiva. Then he became Rebbe, and he was responsible for all Chassidim all over the world. And yet, he never compromised his original responsibility to his family. A real leader doesn't leave the smaller responsibility and graduate to the higher and greater one. He keeps adding, but doesn't drop anything. So the Rebbe became literally a world leader, and yet never forgot the individual, his original responsibility. That is greatness that you hardly ever see. So what does that mean for us? 25th year. Two practical things. Number one, we cannot be private citizens. We have to wake up in the morning and think, who needs me? Who needs an encouraging word? Who needs a little inspiration? Who needs a little guidance? Who needs a little support? That's what the day should be about. And at the end of the day, when you look back at your day, did you do enough? Is there someone else? And there is always someone else. So in our times, we have discovered that a microaggression can ruin your day. It can do more damage than that. A microaggression can turn a person suicidal. Seems crazy, but it's true. And if that's true, then what can a micro mitzvah do? Because the positive is always more powerful than the negative. So if a microaggression can ruin your day, a micro mitzvah can make your day. So no heroics, just everyday goodness, everyday kindness, a micro kindness can change a life. Literally can. So if we stop thinking of ourselves as private citizens, and we think of ourselves as ambassadors, our life becomes so much more meaningful. And in dealing with young people, with teenagers, don't think that if you demand less, you will get more. It doesn't work that way. The teenagers are really idealistic, and if you give them a Judaism that is private, just for themselves, they're not excited. They want a Judaism that changes the world. Challenge them. Challenge them. Stop kvetching. Do something. Do something to change the world for the better. I want to end with this really beautiful story. There's a rabbi in Israel who is brilliant, really a genius. And he gives a class in Talmud at the university in Yerushalayim. All the professors come. But there was one professor that refused to come for many years. He's been giving this class for about 40 years now. This one professor refuses to come. One day, the rabbi meets this professor. And he says to him, why don't you come to the class? All your colleagues come, they enjoy it. Come, you'll enjoy it. He says, I don't belong at a Talmud class. And we have nothing in common. And the rabbi said, what are you saying? What does that mean, we have nothing in common? The professor says, since I came to Israel as a teenager after the war, I eat pork on Shabbos. So the rabbi said, only on Shabbos? He says, dafka on Shabbos. So the rabbi said, no, you see, you said we have nothing in common. We do have something in common. We both observe Shabbos. I observe it the traditional way, and you observe it in an original way. The man started coming to the class. But he was not a fool. He explained to his colleagues what happened. He says, in the rabbi's joke, I heard something really profound. Because the rabbi was saying to him like this, you don't belong at a Talmud class, and we have nothing in common. Why? Because you stopped being a Jew. Because you eat chazer on Shabbos. Listen to yourself. Why do you eat chazer? Because you're angry at God for the Holocaust. So you believe in God, otherwise who are you angry at? You believe that God runs the world, so it must be his fault. He's responsible. You believe in kashrut. How do you know pork is not kosher? So you decided to punish God by eating pork, the most un-Jewish thing you could think of. But somehow, just eating pork didn't feel like enough of a punishment. So you thought, I'm going to eat the pork on Shabbos. That's like adding insult to injury, right? And that felt good. So that means that you believe that Shabbos is a holy day. Otherwise, why does it feel better to eat the pork on Shabbos? So, you believe in God, you believe he runs the world, you believe in kashrut, you believe in Shabbos. You're Orthodox. Like, one more mitzvah, you're a fanatic. And you don't belong at a Talmud class? This is basically the Rebbe's message. The Rebbe's message is, a Jew who says, I'm not Jewish, I hate God. Oh, you're so Jewish. Only a Jew can do that. When you think there's a Jew who isn't interested, why would he come to a Talmud class? He eats pork on Shabbos. The answer is, he eats pork on Shabbos because he's a good Jew. That sounds strange? It's not. Everything a Jew does is Jewish. You just have to push the right button, and it all comes out. Every Jew wants to be a better Jew. So let's get to work. We need a few more mitzvahs, a few more improvements a few more good deeds, a little more kindness, a little more love and oneness among Jews, and the world will tilt in favor of godliness, and the world will change, and we will bring Mashiach. Not because we're so holy, but because it's so true. All we have to do is do it. So now the 25th year, now is the occasion. Now is the occasion. The Rebbe trusted us, the Rebbe believes in us, the Rebbe is depending on us to complete his project. And what better way to live your life anyway? So thank you very much. And let's
partner with Rabbi Friedman. Visit itsgoodtoknow.org/support.